and welcome to another session on literary criticism and theory. We'll continue with the literary forms. We have, not forms, we'll continue with the literary concepts. We have completed up to negative capability. We are yet to start myth. Now myth, in classical Greek, mythos means a signified, it is any story or plot, whether it is true or invented. In its modern significance, however, myth is one story in a mythology, which is a system of hereditary stories of ancient origin which were once believed to be true by a particular culture or cultural group, and which served to explain why the world is as it is and things happen as they do. It is to provide a rationale for social customs and observations that we have today, to give a logical explanation as to why we follow these customs and traditions. Onam, for example, we believe in the myth of Mahabali. It's a legend. He's a legend as well as it's also a myth. And on the day of Onam, the 10 days of Onam, we follow certain customs and rituals. So all these they serve to explain why the world is and what things are to be done and how we are to follow these social customs. So it is a logical explanation to certain social customs that we follow. Okay. Now most myths are related to social rituals, but there's always it's a contradictory thing too, because anthropologists disagree as to whether rituals generated myths or myths generated rituals, whether it was the myth that was responsible for the generation of rituals or whether it was the rituals that led to the generation of myths. We do not know whether these customs and social customs and rituals were the ones that gave birth to certain stories or myths, or whether these stories were the ones that led to to certain social customs and observances that we follow today. If again, as I told you about Mahabali, if the protagonist is a human being rather than a supernatural being, then the traditional story is usually called a legend and not a myth. So Mahabali's story is a legend. Why? Because Mahabali is a human being, and since he is a human being, and it is not about a ruler, it's about a king, and therefore it is not treated as a myth, but instead it is a legend. So if the protagonist is a human being rather than a supernatural being, then the traditional story is called a legend. Okay. Now the most important person associated with myth is Claude Lévi-Strauss. Now Claude Lévi-Strauss was a structuralist. He was an anthropologist and he was a structuralist. He spoke largely about binary oppositions and myth and kinship. Now you have already studied this when I taught you deconstruction. Deconstruction was where Derrida questions especially Lévi-Strauss structure, where Derrida questions structuralism, especially that of Claude Lévi-Strauss. I have already taught you that and you would, if you want to refresh that, you could just go back to the video on deconstruction and just listen to it once more. So, Claude Lévi-Strauss, he was an anthropologist and he spoke largely about binary oppositions and myth and kinship. Now, what is binary opposition? Binary opposition was influenced, he was influenced by this so-called binary opposition by his study of linguistics. And what is it? Binary opposition is when when you want to understand a language, that is, in order to understand a language, you can only understand it by binary opposition, that is, which is according to Lévi-Strauss. He felt that culture is composed, even the whole culture is composed of hidden rules that gives it meaning. According to him, every human being thinks through binaries, through opposites. For example, man, opposite is woman. So, a woman is what a man is not, and a man is what a woman is not. Death, life, morning, night, raw, cooked, all these are the opposite. So, according to Claude Lévi-Strauss, every human being thinks through binaries or through opposites, and it is there in all our culture. It exists in culture itself. He states that in order to understand culture in society, you need to understand these binary opposites or oppositions. They are universal. It is not just that it exists in India, it exists everywhere. According to him, all cultures, every culture, all cultures think like this. Be it European culture, be it Asian culture, be it African culture, American culture, all cultures think in the same way, that is the binary oppositions. Likewise, these words make sense, that is, these words, whichever words they are, they make sense only in relation to one another. For instance, man makes sense only in relation to woman. A man is what a woman is not. In other words, morning has meaning only in terms of night. If we remove night, morning as such, if we don't have something called night, if the word night does not exist, if that thing, that opposite itself, it does not exist, then night ceases its meaning, does not have any meaning. So, to him, language is understood on the basis of its opposites, and he, being an anthropologist, states that the same thing applies to society and culture also. So, this language, as long as language can be understood or through opposites, it is the same to do with what he applies, the same rule of the language, the binary opposition of language in or to understand society and culture. Okay, that's binary opposite. Next concept is the myth. That's what we have in our concepts. So I just told you this just to get you into understanding, or just to get you to understand what binary oppositions are and how culture and society works on the basis of binary opposition. Now let's come to culture. Again, myth is universal. Everyone relates to one another through what? Kinship. Now, what is kinship? Kinship is blood relation. That is something associated with family relation. Okay? So, this myth and kinship, they go together. Diverse cultures too have similar need for progress. Right? Every culture wants what? Every culture wants to progress. So, he looks at the structure of different cultures. According to him, all the cultures, in the society, he observes that all of them has certain basic needs. Every culture in the society has a basic need. And that basic need is what? The basic need is that particular culture wants a progress. They want to move on, they want to progress, they want good things to come to their community, or they want good things to happen in their culture. So, according to Strauss, this progress is the basic structure which is followed by all of them. So the first one is binary opposition, which is related to culture and society. The next one is the basic thing, which is progress. Now let's come to myth. According to Strauss, myth are also structures, just like binary opposition and just like just like kinship. This is also a kind of structure. So you find kinship. If you look at kinship, kinship is the blood relation, anything that is associated with family and with relation. So here he is speaking about the relationship between different cultures, and the basic structure in that culture is what? Kinship or need for progress. Okay, the basic need is a need for progress in kinship. So next one is myth, and all myths, Christian myths, Greek myths, Hindu myths, all the myths appear to be different. They appear different, but if you are to take a close look at them, you will find that they also have a structure. They also have the same structure. They are actually saying the same thing. Noah's myth, and in the Bible, the Matsya avatar in Hinduism, they are all the same. They're saying the same thing. Then Greek mythology, you have the Trojan War, the Helen of Troy. The war was fought for Helen, the Trojan War. And what about Mahabharata? And also in Mahabharata, if you look at Mahabharata, you have Achilles, and you have Karnan. So you see the same structure that is being followed. So here Claude Lévi-Strauss, who is an anthropologist and a structuralist, tells us that there is always a structure. Language, just like language is structured, likewise culture and society is also structured. There's a structure in culture and society, and it works through binary opposition, it works through kinship, it works through myth. So we were dealing with myth. So I told you what myths are. Myths are something which is to do with which is now in the modern sense a system of hereditary stories of ancient origins which were once believed to be true by a particular cultural group and which serve to explain why the world is as it is and things happen as they do. So this, as Claude Lévi-Strauss puts it, can be found not just in one particular culture, it can be found in almost all the cultures. If you look at all the cultures, you will find that there are resemblances, there are similarities. The French structuralist Claude Lévi-Strauss, he departed from the traditional view which we just described, that is to treat the myths within each culture as signifying systems whose true meanings are unknown to their proponents. Instead, he analyzes the myths of a particular culture as composed of signs which are to be identified and interpreted by cultural anthropologists on the model of linguistic theory of Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure is a structuralist. So what Claude Lévi-Strauss is trying to tell us that just like in language, as Ferdinand de Saussure said that it is composed of signs, language is composed of signs and can be identified and interpreted it can be identified and interpreted. Just like that, the same theory of structuralism can be applied in anthropology also. that is the study of culture and society as well. You will find a structure in this as well. Another important contribution to the theory of myths is the German intellectual historian Hans Blumenberg and his work on myth. Okay, and this was translated in 1985. Among other things, Blumenberg proposes that the function of myth is to help human beings cope with the reality or inexorability of reality and the course of events, a need that is not outmoded by scientific advances and rationality. The myths evolved according to Darwinism of words, in which those forms and variations survive that cope most effectively with changing social environment, and that myth is best conceived not as a collection of fixed and final stories, but as a work, an ongoing and ever-changing process that is expressed in oral and written narratives and involves the diverse ways in which these narratives are received and appropriated. So Blumenberg, he tells us that the function of myth is to help human beings to understand some things that cannot be really explained, that the human beings will find it difficult to cope with the reality. So in order to make things much easier, in order to make things much rational, without the help of science, that is, these myths will do the trick. These myths will help human beings to cope with some of the unexplainable, difficult and harsh realities of life and its course of events. Okay, so it can be said that a mythology is a religion which we do not believe. It's a kind of religion, but we don't actually believe it. Poets, however, after having ceased to believe them, have persisted in using myths of Jupiter, Venus, Prometheus, Wotan, Adam and Eve, and Jonah for their plots, episodes and allusions. Now a number of modern writers have also used this. I told you modernism, we've studied modernism. Modernism was a period of fragmentation, and also it was a period where there was a lot of chaos in the world. It was difficult to cope with reality, and therefore what did the modernist writers do? They used mythology. They used mythology to explain this fragment, or to show this fragmented piece of world. So, for instance, James Joyce in his Ulysses, and Finnegan's Wake, T.S. Eliot in his Wasteland, Eugene O'Neill in Morning Becomes Electra, and many other writers have deliberately woven their modern materials on the pattern of ancient myths. W.B. Yeats and Blake, his predecessor Blake, they used it in their poems, as well as they used it to construct their own systematic mythology, which Yeats expounded in A Vision, and also in poems like The Second Coming and Byzantium. And towards the middle of the 20th century, myth became a prominent term in literary analysis. A large group of writers, the myth critics, which included Robert Graves, Francis Ferguson, Maud Botkin, Richard Chase, and the most important of all, Northrop Frye, viewed the genres and the individual plot patterns of many works of literature, including what on the surface are highly sophisticated and realistic works. And they are seen as recurrences of basic myths, for mythic formulas. So that's with myth. You can read the text as well. Don't forget to read the text. So let's stop here, and we'll start archetypal criticism in the next class. So thank you and keep safe.